Hello and welcome back to the channel, guys. My name is Dan and I'm here to bring you another FPL video. In this one, it's a slightly different video. I wanted to put together a bit of a strategy video just to kind of talk about long-term plans. Once the double game week, of course, of game week 20 was announced, we've also got a likelihood or possibilities ahead of us as well in future game weeks. And I felt like I wanted to answer a couple of questions and maybe just help you guys strategize over the coming weeks on which transfers to prioritize and how to shape our team up in the best possible way. So I've got fixture analysis, I've got possible player options within those fixtures as well for those teams. As well as that, I'll be breaking down Ben Crellin's spreadsheet for all the possibilities and talking about that in minute detail, so stick around for that. And of course as well, we'll be looking at just in general teams I think that are worth targeting over the short term and maybe some to avoid as well. So if you like the content and you're new around here, then please do consider subscribing to me. It's completely free and I'll be giving out content all the way through this season and hopefully future seasons as well. And of course, if you like the content as well, guys, then smash a like below. So let's have a look first of all on the fixture analysis of the next 5 weeks. So I've chosen game weeks 20 to 24 as I felt like 5 weeks, I think most of the community will agree with me, is the kind of sweet spot really for any transfers that we make that aren't either, you know, part of a wild card or of course a free hit, for example. But I do feel like that's the sweet spot of where we'd want to bring a player in, maybe assess their performances and try and evaluate, do we want to keep them longer term or is it time to move them on? So I felt like this was the sweet spot, and these are the 6 teams in front of us that we're going to be talking about first of all. So of course it's no surprise that at the top of this list it is Manchester City. They have got 2 double game weeks over the next 4 game weeks in game week 20 and game week 23. So of course I think a lot of managers are sitting on at least 2 Manchester City assets, and maybe you're looking at bringing in a third, maybe KDB for example for Mo Salah. Maybe you're looking at moving on Cancelo to a slightly different defender and going sideways there. Of course Phil Foden as well is in some teams. Maybe you're looking at an alternative for him and going somewhere else, maybe a Mahrez pick or a Grealish, for example. But yeah, that's essentially where we're at on the top of the list. We then have Arsenal, of course, in second, and that again is more than likely down to the fact they have very, very good fixtures post game week 22, and then of course that double in 23 as well. Then newly added to the fixture ticker with Manchester United and Palace in 3rd and 4th respectively because of that double game week in 20. It's also worth noting when we get to the Ben Crellin spreadsheet element of this video, we'll be able to discuss the possible or the likelihood of other game weeks that fall within this range as well, and Manchester United are at a possibility of having double game weeks elsewhere within this time frame as well. So they're still 3rd on the list and a team that I definitely would look at targeting. We're playing much better now, and in general I think both defense and offensively there are options to go for. Of course Rashford I would say is probably in a pretty decent amount of squads now. Luke Shaw is maybe still a little bit of a differential, but he's one that I would like to pick out. Maybe the likes of Eriksen as a budget option. He could potentially be a little bit short term. Maybe if we get that second double game week confirmed, for example, you can maybe move him on to a slightly sort of other enabling budget option later down the line. Bruno Fernandes, of course, you know, really up there in terms of the expected goal involvement, just not necessarily hitting his fantasy numbers of previous seasons yet. Of course, Palace, worth noting that their fixtures aren't really, in my opinion, too great. Of course, Chelsea and Man United are not really easy fixtures. Chelsea are not particularly doing very well. Of course, it is an away fixture, so maybe that helps them bounce back a little bit. But Man United at home, I do think it's going to be a bit of a tricky fixture for them. The only picks I would really potentially look at for them are the talisman, of course, of Zaha, and maybe Eze fits into the mark here as well. But I'm not necessarily looking at or rushing to go out and buy Palace assets. Of course, Leeds in the mix here as well. You know, 5th down on this list, but they do not have any double game weeks as of yet. There was potential they could have doubled against Manchester United if they wouldn't have drawn against Cardiff, of course, in the FA Cup. But now that replay is, of course, taking place, we know that's not a possibility for Leeds. And then of course Spurs making the list just at the bottom here with very tricky fixtures in game week 20. But it's worth noting that although we've got Fulham in between of course that second Manchester City fixture in game week 22, from game week 23 onwards Spurs look like a team that we can probably hold on to assets for all the way through into the end of the season. Their fixture run looks incredible, yeah, I just think that if we do go early on a possible Kane or a Son or maybe even a defensive move, if you're in the market for one of those, we could actually see ourselves holding on to them for a long time. So that's kind of the analysis overall. I feel like, again, a lot of the teams that are showcased here, I feel like we're probably looking at a minimum of 6 double game weekers in most engaged managers' squads, right? We've probably got 2 Arsenal, maybe 1 Manchester United, maybe 2 Manchester City, and you might have 1 Leeds, 1 Spurs flying around, for example. So I feel like you've probably got at least 5 or 6 double game week players pre-transfers, and then if you're looking to bring in specifically double game week players only, then even with a -4 or 2 free transfers, you could even reach the heights of 7 or 8 players. So I think that even long term, these fixtures are good for these teams. So it's worth noting that also. We've then got my kind of personal player picks. Now, some of these I won't spend too much time on them, because I won't even really go through each of them individually, because this isn't a stats-based video. It's just a summary or an overall strategy of where I think people should be looking towards. And I think that any one of these players, or a given mixture of them, can potentially work over the long term, especially, like I say, this kind of 5-week period that we're at. We've got Kane, Rashford, Son, De Bruyne, Odegaard, Haaland, Shaw. Of course, all of those are doubling. It is worth noting Rodrigo at the end of this list isn't the doubler, but he definitely is somebody that I think needs to be put onto people's radar. He scored against Cardiff. He nearly had a brace against West Ham in the Premier League, which was, of course, on game week 19 when I brought him in. And I genuinely believe that, as playing as that kind of out of position number 9 while Bamford is injured, and of course he's listed as a midfielder in FPL, that's perfect. Every goal scored nets him an extra point. Of course, he gets the clean sheet point as well if Leeds do manage that. And in general as well, I feel like a midfielder scoring goals, it helps their bonus points quite significantly too. So I think at 6.3 million, he offers a tremendous budget option for people. Again, even though he's not a budget option, I do still think he was worth noting in terms of a personal player pick of mine. We're then going to be talking about now Ben Crellin's spreadsheet. So I'm going to be breaking this down into sections. The first point here is just I put it in mass so that we can just kind of look at it as an overall snapshot. Do what you will with this video, or of course I'll leave the link in the description below directly to this sheet so you can analyze it in your own time. And of course Ben Crellin's Twitter page as well will be linked once again, because I know I keep crediting this guy on my videos recently, but he just does such phenomenal work, and it really does help in terms of that forward planning, right? And it's kind of the perfect tool to use, really, to analyze the future planning section of this video. So we'll be talking about, first of all, 2 clubs that I think one of them at least is in the talking points, right? We've got a snapshot here, first of all of the potential double game weeks across game weeks 21 and 22. In the key down below, you can see the likely double game week is Liverpool and Chelsea. And of course, in 22, you can see Man United and Leeds as well, potentially doubling there. The possible double game weeks have got the double question marks. So they're all the other ones that are not necessarily likely. Maybe they're under 50%. I don't know what likelihood or what measurement Ben's used, but definitely the Chelsea and the Liverpool fixture looks the most likely to be the immediate announced double game week that we may have. So they're the 2 clubs that I want to focus on and talk about first of all. As you can see here, really, I think the main asset in question is going to be Darwin Núñez. I think a lot of people, of course, wildcarded him in on the World Cup wildcard. And of course, he hasn't been delivering. He's only gained 1 assist over the past 3 game weeks. His XG and XGI numbers are looking fantastic, but the finishing product is just not quite there. Of course, he goes and trolls us as FPL managers by scoring in the FA Cup fixture against Wolves, and took it very, very neatly and cleanly, I might add. I think I saw a couple of different Photoshop posts of, if this was in the Premier League, it'd be going out for a throw-in, for example. I definitely make them right that in the Premier League, he isn't quite hitting those numbers yet that we wanted to. So some of the hesitation, of course, in the community is around this possible double game week for Liverpool. Now, yes, they would have a double Chelsea fixture. Chelsea are maybe a team on the decline, you could argue, that, under Graham Potter, they've not been at their best yet. And potentially it is possible to keep hold of him. If there's other routes that you can get, to example, Harry Kane, as I know he's definitely one to watch for a lot of managers this week. I think realistically, the double for Chelsea, it isn't necessarily something that I would hold on to him for only, right? I would hold on to him because I want to hold on to him for the longer term, or I just feel like there potentially could be that double-digit haul coming in. It's just not particularly, in my opinion, very fun to own him. It's just such a roller coaster when you watch the live games where Liverpool are being shown. It's very, very difficult to justify owning him, where he just misses so many chances. So I just wanted to highlight it that yes, it is a likely double game week, but it's not exactly Liverpool playing Chelsea at home, and then let's say Nottingham Forest at home as well. They're not playing Bournemouth at home. It is 2 Chelsea fixtures, both home and away. So take it into as you will. It's of course your own personal decision. I will never tell you what you should be doing. Only give advice and present information that helps your decision making. But I think Darwin is an easy sell for me, regardless of this potential double game week. So that's really I feel like one of the burning questions in the community. Then, of course, we've got the other 5 teams here to note that, again, we haven't got a very high chance of doubles in 21, but there is every possibility. And as you can see there, Brighton could potentially even have a triple game week. Now, that is very, very unlikely, but as you can see, they've got Crystal Palace or Bournemouth to be played on the midweek on Tuesday, the 24th of January, and then a week later on Tuesday, the 31st of January. If they did play Bournemouth the week before, they could essentially slot the Palace fixture in on the Tuesday the 31st. It's just, I feel like the fixture congestion is not going to work. I don't feel like we're going to get a triple game week, but it is just something worth noting. Of course, the other teams highlighted here, we know that Arsenal always had a potential double against Everton and Manchester United in 21 ahead of their Everton fixture away. Of course, that is the one of the fixtures they needs to be rearranged. We've got, of course, Bournemouth in there. Yes, potentially they are. I feel like, yes, you'd only maybe look at Solanke as an option, but it is worth noting they have got Forest and Brighton as a potential double game week, which may not be too bad. But generally speaking, I don't feel like any of these teams really are worth investing in other than Arsenal. I think Arsenal long term, of course, because we've got the double in 23, which isn't shown on the snapshot here, but of course we know from the fixture analysis at the beginning of the video, that's where they're doubling again. I feel like Arsenal are probably your best bet. Right, Crystal Palace are probably a monitor, Brighton as well because they have some budget enablers, but I think Bournemouth and Everton, it's safe to say that I wouldn't necessarily go near them too quickly. Of course, then there's worth noting that at the end we do have Manchester United and Leeds in game week 22 that potentially could double as well. Now that Man United's double looks very, very good indeed. That Crystal Palace at home and Leeds at home fixture looks very, very promising. And the likelihood of, like a Rashford captaincy choice, for example, could definitely be on the cards there. Maybe even a differential in Bruno Fernandes if you decide to go for him. But I think that looks very promising. And of course, again, this is a likely double game week, according to Ben Crellin, because he's put only one question mark there. So they're going to be under pressure, I think, the Premier League to rearrange this fixture. Man United have got a very busy schedule. And really, this is one of the only midweeks that makes sense to fit that fixture in. So I think it's a very high chance we do see that double in 22 as well. So again, it goes back to that, Rodrigo, Rashford, Luke Shaw as options in terms of your game week 20 transfers. You're also kind of banking that there is a very high chance or a likelihood that we get some really good fixtures. I mean, even the Leeds fixtures against Forest and Man United respectively, I think Rodrigo again is a really good asset to own over this period. So that's in detail where we're at with Ben Crellin, and hopefully that made sense and helped you out. Of course, it is something that I've not done before, to be honest. I of course, don't like to use other people's content as such, but like I say, Ben just does such a good job of it. I feel like it would be rude not to use it as a tool to discuss what the future plans look like. And then, of course, I've gone and dissected those 5 teams that we mentioned in Arsenal, Bournemouth, Brighton, Palace and Everton that have possible double game weeks around that game week 22 mark. And I honestly feel like the only 2 teams I would potentially look at buying around that 21, 22 mark are Arsenal and Brighton. So the key underneath me, you've got buy if it's surrounded in blue, avoid surrounded in red, and just the monitor if it's surrounded in that dark purple. So Arsenal and Brighton, I think a triple up on Arsenal is definitely worth a potential punt. Of course, you can double up on attack, maybe get one defender. Of course, I have included Jesus in the squad. I don't feel like he will be back and fit and ready for the doubles in time, but it is worth noting in terms of their midfield, Martinelli and Saka, still, potentially both of them are on penalties, so there's some great upside there. My personal picks are all in blue, and I feel like Odegaard is the way to go. I think he, at his value, or at his price point, should I say, just offers so much value for this Arsenal team. I just think, if you want a route into them and you can't quite stretch to the likes of Saka, I think Odegaard is definitely going to be a man with consistent minutes in the Premier League and just seems to be a much more advanced creative midfielder this season as opposed to last season. So definitely worth an investment there. Zinchenko's also one to watch. I want to monitor his minutes. Of course, he did get 90 minutes against Newcastle. He played really, really well, in my opinion, against the 4-2 win at Brighton. He actually, I think, got into the box numerous occasions and tested Sanchez a couple of times. So I definitely feel like he potentially is an out-of-position defender going into kind of, that left wing, left fullback position. So he's one to watch. White, I think, he's kind of fallen down the pecking order for me in terms of a potential Arsenal defender of recent. I just think with Tomiyasu on the cards as well for Arteta, it gives him an option and potentially there's a bit of rotation there. Maybe not. Arsenal fans, let me know in the comments below if you think White's always going to be first choice ahead of Tomiyasu. But I think with such a fixture congestion, it's maybe not as kind of convincing to go with him. And of course, then Gabriel, another defender worth mentioning. So I definitely feel like Arsenal are a team that I would invest in, even on game week 20, ahead of those possible doubles. Going on to Bournemouth then, I put them as an avoid. I just think that the limited options that we have with them, I'll only ever feel like I could consider Solanke as an option. Of course, he is a budget third striker and he does allow kind of those enabling funds to be used elsewhere. But my personal formation at the moment, or preferred formation, is a 3-5-2. So I don't feel like I would reach him. But I could see the appeal in potentially, moving one of your budget strikers, maybe a Mitrovic down to him, potentially a Martial if he doesn't get as many minutes, if we do make any moves in the January transfer window for a striker. And I just feel like, yes, potentially he is an option, but it's just not someone that I would invest in personally. And then, of course, Brighton, I do genuinely believe that this is a team that's on the rise. I think with De Zerbi, there's obviously been a couple of comments to note about one individual, which I'll get onto here, but I do think they offer some great budget enablers. Yeah, there's definitely some other defenders I could have included here in Dunk, for example, or maybe Veltman, someone like that, Webster potentially, barring injuries, of course. But McAllister is probably my number one pick alongside Matoma. I think both of them have got real good, kind of value in them. I think that the fact that McAllister is on penalties and he's already come back and scored 2 goals for Brighton just speaks volumes. I think his confidence is going to be through the roof after winning that World Cup. And of course, Matoma as well he's even cheaper than McAllister and potentially could just be a replacement for Andreas and a long-term hold, even up to a potential bench boost, right? If Brighton's fixtures don't get rearranged in these, kind of future weeks or most immediate future weeks, we can hold him on as a bench option all the way up until they do get announced, where bench option or bench boosts can become an option. And then, of course, Trossard is the man, as aforementioned. That De Zerbi, I think he's fallen out of favour with him a little bit. Of course, he did mention, I think in a press conference, that he wasn't seeing enough of Trossard in terms of training and in terms of the energy that he's been bringing to the team. I don't know if he's just maybe a little bit disheartened about the World Cup, of course, but he just hasn't looked the same, I think, since the return. So unfortunate that he's now also injured, but I think he's potentially too expensive to go for when we do have the likes of McAllister and Matoma as midfield options for them. And then, of course, Estepinian is the defence or defender that I've noted. I just feel like he offers the most attacking threat. I think he was very unfortunate not to register a return in the 4-1 victory against Everton, to be honest. I know, of course, the clean sheet wipeout happened, but for Brighton to score that many goals and Estepinian to have kind of assisted the assister a couple of times, I feel is a bit unfortunate. So I think that there's returns due for that man, and only at 4.5 million, I think he's a potential enabling option too. Palace next up, I have mentioned on here limited options basically based on their inconsistency. They don't seem to be putting many performances together back to back. I've noted, of course, Eze and Zaha are probably the 2 picks I would go with. Zaha most notably being the talisman selection and, of course, on penalties. I think, at his price point, though, there are also other enabling options. You could go a little bit lower to Rodrigo. You could go a little bit lower to Odegaard. You could even go lower, of course, to McAllister or Matoma and probably get a more consistent individual as well as a better team that they're currently playing for. So I don't necessarily feel like he's a go and get, but I feel like if you did have him in your World Cup wildcard, he's probably a keep for now, just because they've got this obviously this double game week in game week 20. And then finally on to Everton. I think that they are in an avoid category for me personally. I think it's a club that's on the decline at the moment. They did put in a really good performance for what it's worth against Manchester United in the FA Cup. Of course, they did go on to lose the game 3-1, but I don't necessarily feel like the scoreline gave them too much justice. I felt like they really put in a shift there, and I put Lampard's sacking question mark. I don't necessarily feel like this may happen, but if it does, I just feel like it potentially could be a risk of going for their assets even more, because there may not be that stability and that structure that we want in essentially our FPL teams, as well as the physical Premier League side itself. So I've kind of put no options to consider. There maybe that's a little bit out of order. I feel like DCL definitely has had his moments. Damari Gray looks like a player that's definitely one to watch as a budget option. Maybe I would go down the route of like Mikalenko for a defensive option, and someone that may potentially return from an attacking threat as well. But I really don't think that there's any consideration for Everton. Now, the last piece of information that I'll talk about here, I haven't got any graphics created for it, but of course I've mentioned this is kind of future planning, or we're looking at the strategy over the next few weeks. It is worth mentioning that Game Week 25 is looking like it is a blank game week. So I haven't, of course, as mentioned, got a graphic to show you, but on Ben Crellin's website, or on Ben Crellin's spreadsheet, you will be able to see a red column essentially that looks like it's filled with teams and squads that we own quite a lot of players on. It's going to be very difficult, in my opinion, to plan for both the potential double game weeks and also plan for the blank. I don't feel like we can kill two birds with one stone, for lack of better analogy, to be honest. I feel like we've got to target the doubles over the potential blank. There are teams like Everton that are probably not going to be blanking on that game week, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend going and transferring them in just to cover that blank, as opposed to targeting the potential hauls that we might get in double game weeks. And I know that might be a little bit difficult to digest, so you may have to go re-watch what I've said, and also just look at Ben Crellin's spreadsheet as well. But I think that's why, again, I've limited this strategy video to kind of game weeks 20 to 24 for now. Once we get more news about the potential blank game weeks based on cup results, we can then maybe start to strategize a little bit further down the line and start trying to look at a couple of maybe budget options to see us through that blank game week. But of course, guys, as always, if you enjoy the content, smash a like below. And as mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you're new around here, you've enjoyed the content, smash that subscribe button as well. We recently hit the mark of 500, so a massive thank you and shout out to all of you once again that have done so. And of course, I'll be doing a live stream ahead of the Game Week 20 deadline, so feel free to join me on that. I'm not sure if I'll be putting out any more Game Week 20 specific videos. There may be a transfer targets video to come with a bit more of a breakdown of statistics for those players that I mentioned earlier. But if not, if I don't have time, then I will definitely see you on the live stream, I hope. So thanks again for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the content, and I will see you in a video or stream very, very soon.